There are a few subsections under safe working practice. The first is stability. Firstly, you should be aware that every lift truck has a rated capacity plate, which details the maximum weight that a machine will safely lift and at what height. It is extremely dangerous for an operator to lift a load that exceeds the capacity of the lift truck. Operators must always be aware of the weight of the loads. If a load exceeds the capacity of the lift truck, there is a much greater risk of the lift truck tipping over. Here's an example. As can be seen from this example of a capacity plate, as the height of the load increases, the capacity reduces. In other words, the lift truck can lift less weight as the height increases. Now let's work through the basics of what could make a forklift unstable. To do this, we need to understand what is generally termed as the stability triangle. The stability triangle is a line drawn between the two front wheels and the rear axle. When the lift truck is not carrying a load, the centre of gravity is to the rear of the lift truck, as shown in this example. A load has its own centre of gravity, also shown in this example. When a lift truck picks up a load, the centre of gravity of the lift truck and the load combine in the centre of the truck. This is the combined centre of gravity. For the lift truck to remain stable and safe, the centre of gravity needs to stay within the stability triangle. Lifting or lowering the load, braking and accelerating, or turning a tight corner, all have an effect on the centre of gravity. When a load is raised, the stability triangle becomes a pyramid. The higher the load is lifted, the higher the centre of gravity. You can see here that the higher the load is lifted, the centre of gravity moves closer to the edges of the stability pyramid. When operating a reach truck and extending the reach, you can see how close the centre of gravity is to the edge of the stability pyramid. That means any actions of bad practice have a much higher risk of the lift truck tipping over. Forklift instability can be caused by a number of factors. The main causes of longitudinal or front-to-back instability are harsh braking and acceleration, undercutting, not heeling the load, live load, a swinging load can move the centre of gravity, causing instability, ground conditions, for example potholes or debris. If a truck needs to be driven over rail tracks or a drainage gully, always drive over diagonally and slowly. Incorrect load lowering, for example lowering a heavy load, then quickly bringing it to a stop. Incorrect use of tilt, for example increased tilt at height. And finally, overloading, where the weight of the load is too great for the capacity of the truck. We're now going to look at lateral or side-to-side instability. The main causes of lateral instability are turning at speed. It's important to remember that an unladen truck is less stable than a laden truck. If you remember the stability triangle, the centre of gravity is central when a truck is laden correctly. Turning with an elevated load, the higher the load is carried, the closer the truck is to the edge of the stability triangle, making the factors that affect stability crucial, such as turning, travelling across an incline, increasing the risk of tip over, carrying a load off-centre, or flat or damaged tyres, causing a truck to tip to one side. Any lift truck is at its most stable when being driven at a sensible speed, on even ground, in a straight line, with a load being carried as low as practically possible, the pallet in contact with the forkheels, and stabilising back tilt applied. This ensures that the centre of gravity is as far back as possible. On a reach truck, the reach should be fully retracted to enable this to be achieved. When driving on sloping ground, there is always an increased risk of tipping over. You should drive slowly and use the brakes gently. Never drive diagonally and do not turn on the incline. Keep your forks as low as possible to reduce the truck's center of gravity and apply back tilt. When driving unladen, your forks should always be facing downhill. Always look in the direction of travel, which means when traveling uphill, you will need to be looking over your shoulder. When you are driving with a load, your fork should always be facing uphill, which means when you're traveling downhill, you will need to be looking over your shoulder. And if your view is obscured by a large load, it is recommended that you use a banksman. The law requires that a seatbelt must be worn whilst operating a counterbalance, pivot steer, telescopic handler or side loader with a lifting capacity of under 10,000 kg. For all other types of lift truck, if a seatbelt is fitted, then it is advisable to wear it, and if it is your company policy, then you must wear it. The only exception is if a very specific risk assessment has been performed under HSE Guidance Note MISC 241. This is a legal requirement, but it's also for your personal safety. A seatbelt on a lift truck is designed to keep the operator within the confines of the cab in the event of a tip-over to prevent them from being crushed by the overhead guard. This is often referred to as the mousetrap. We have now covered the stability element of safe working practice, and you should now understand what makes a forklift stable and unstable. The second element under safe working practice is speed. Wherever you are operating a lift truck, you should always drive at a speed that is appropriate to the environment and conditions and according to the company rules. Increases in traffic, reduced operating space, visibility and ground conditions will all affect your conditions and environment, and therefore your speed should change to suit the situation. You should always drive at a speed that would ensure that you have time to safely react. Avoid fast cornering and harsh accelerating or braking. Reduce your speed and stay in control. The third element under safe working practice is operating area. At the start of each shift, you should always carry out a series of pre-use checks on your lift truck. This complies with the law and also ensures that your equipment remains safe to operate. Any problems should be reported immediately to your manager, and any faulty equipment should not be used until repaired. Before picking up any load, the operator must be aware of the weight of the load and the capacity of the lift truck that they are using. The condition of the load and pallet must be checked to ensure it's safe to lift, to prevent the load from falling off the truck and causing injury or damage. You must also check the dimensions of the load to make sure it's suitable to transport and can safely be unloaded. Make sure that the load is fully heeled, with back tilt applied, and that the forks are not too long and protrude, as this may cause adjacent loads to be dislodged when stacking. As a pedestrian, for your own safety, you should report any load that looks unstable to the driver and your manager. If you are driving your car in rain or snow, you'd slow down and take greater care on the roads, and the same applies to operating a forklift. Something that's encountered more regularly whilst operating a forklift is moving from a dark area to a light area and vice versa, such as entering or exiting a warehouse. In these conditions, the operator needs to give themselves time for their eyes to adjust before continuing with the operation. Whilst operating a lift truck, you should never do anything that would affect your concentration or ability to control the truck. Avoid eating, drinking, using your phone, smoking, or anything else. If you observe any unsafe behavior, you should report this to your manager. Safe parking should be carried out in a safe location where you aren't blocking any doors, especially emergency exits and equipment, or anywhere where it could cause an obstruction, especially pedestrian walkways, as this would force a pedestrian to walk into lift truck traffic areas. The safest position for the truck is on level ground, with the mast tilted forward and fork tips on the ground, the parking brake on, ignition key or fob removed, and on a reach truck, the reach should be fully retracted.